Hello, all my children, and welcome back to the Sex, Drugs, and Jesus podcast. I'm your host, Devanin. I have with me your favorite cool, delicious, wild, and tangy aunt, Lluvia Peveto, also known as TacoBelissima on Instagram and on TikTok. All of that will go in the show notes. She was with us before, dishing her world knowledge, lived the knowledge, and gained experience on polyamory. And now we're back today to talk about Jesus and some Christian things and such. How are you doing today, homegirl?
Doing good. Thank you for having me on the show again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for tuning in. And just to remind you a little bit more about Julia, she is a native Texan, though I met her here in Baton Rouge, twirling about as I do many, many years ago. And it was an instant connection at first sight. Uvi and I have never had an argument, never had a fight, never had anything but bubbles and smiles and all the lovely things that should be between two people who respect each other. She's really fucking smart. She's she's a former journalist, and she now does marketing and public relations and things like that. The girl has it all. So, so interesting. Like, so we're switching from the last show talking about ways to engage the world with true positive sexuality and mutual respect and everything like that. And now we're going to talk about some spiritual implications of life. What is it that you feel like stood out the most to you about like your Christian quote unquote upbringing? Or is there anything you'd like to say to get us started?
Um, I think everybody's journey with religion is takes different turns. And I guess prefacing this with, like, for instance, when I share my beliefs or my personal upbringing, that it is not meant to convert people in any way. I feel that people should have freedom of thought and make their own decisions. And I'm here to share, but not tell people how to live, I guess, is a good way to start.
Concur, concur, concur. And that, which is the central theme of everything that I do. It's about transparency because, there's people out there with no one to have religious conversations with and just hearing. There's so much, in hearing that can save people, in their mental health,
Right.
so we may be saving, from something, as I'm saying that, I'm thinking about that guy, Moonbin from the K-pop band who they believe committed suicide, which is a headline I just read before we like got on here, but like he was like 25,
Oh my gosh, that's so sad.
right? And you never know. You just never, I just never take for granted what the hell might be going on between someone's ears. And so let's be transparent. No, we're not here to convert anybody, but damn it, we're going to talk about it because we talk about everything, you know.
Exactly.
Because if I was going to go and be like, oh, I had this orgy this weekend, or I'm going to go and go travel to this country or climb Mount Everest or whatever the case may be, I wouldn't feel like I'm trying to convert someone to have sex or to travel. I'm just sharing an experience. And so, unless I say you need to be like me or your way is wrong, okay. Other than that, girl, we gonna talk about spirituality and religion like we so easily talk about every fucking thing else, and that's the way it's meant.
I love that. Yes, 100%.
So, do you think like your culture like mixed with religion in any way and had an impact on you, or
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a good question. I grew up very religious. So my mother was brought up in a very traditionally Catholic family. My father was brought up Baptist, and then he became a fixture in the Apostolic Church. Later on, my dad converted to Catholicism. for my mother. And then he we went to the Catholic church a lot, and then they changed churches when I was around 11, and we started, like, going to every single church because my mother had experienced being born again, so she wanted to see how she could better connect with God, and so we went to a lot of different churches. I was exposed to a lot of different religions at, like, the age of 10 or 11, and that happened for, like, about 2 years that we kind of went on this journey of my mother finding what she best connected with, and we ended up in a non-denominational church. So I would say that my exposure to different religion was well-rounded,
Hmm.
and when I was, I don't know, in my teens, I went through a study course in which I read about the Torah and the Quran, all this kind of stuff. So I was exposed to a lot of different spiritual beliefs from an early age, although I was still taught that Christianity was the correct way to live originally. So that formed a lot of my viewpoints about the world very early on. I was deeply religious, and the in Hispanic communities, Catholicism and being Baptist are very prevalent. And when Mexico was conquered originally, I think it was back in that, I don't want to be wrong, the 1500s or so, Cortez used Catholicism to convert the Aztecs and some of the other tribes within Mexico in order to have better control of power. So basically colonizing the nation. And that was something that the Aztecs and other tribes used to blend together their previous faith into Catholicism because they were forced to convert many times. And otherwise, they would be persecuted if they didn't adapt to Catholicism. So, what many people did as they followed uh, practices like adding their superstitions to the traditional or adding their original rituals to Catholicism or other stuff. So I grew up being exposed to some aspects of Santeria, some aspects of other spiritual kind of practices. So like altars and honoring the dead and like the Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead and stuff like that. So I grew up with a lot of mysticism, a lot of belief in ritual and stuff like that. So it's all blended in together. It's very complex.
As they say in certain circles, baby, you've got some strong magics. She's talking about getting off into what some people would consider like more like magical type things and using elements to influence this or that, be it candle magic with the altars, different powders and incenses and things like that. Super strong here in the South, especially down in New Orleans. Super strong in places like Haiti. Super strong in the Hispanic culture. You know, everywhere you go, you got an altar, you got a candle going. Somebody's with a rosary. You know, it's like the whole thing. So, a couple of comments I have as I was taking notes on what you were saying. In 1521 is when that happened. So you were right with your time frame. See, I told y'all she was smart. And so I do Travis Elliott's. I subscribe to his yoga practice and I do it all the time. And so when you're doing yoga with him or any of his teachers, they say like these different sayings and things like that. And I can't remember who said this, but he said that someone said that all the world's problems extend from people's incapability to sit still alone in a room. And so because people are always moving about. So when you said that your mother wanted to better connect with God and she was trying to go to all of these different churches and religions and things like that. On the one hand, I'm here for the open-mindedness and curiosity, but then again, by the same token, we never really have to go anywhere to find God or to connect with him because he's right there in the first place. And I don't know, what do you think about that? Because people do it, they hop from church to religion, but God was always there the whole time.
I I agree with that sentiment. I think that yes, you can have a connection to God or the spiritual world outside of a church or an institution. I think a lot of times we are very communal creatures, and sometimes we need a little help or support or to find kindred spirits. And so religious institutions or organizations prove very helpful to a lot of people, not because, yes, they can end up regulating or structuring something, but I think because a lot of people find community there. And so it's important to a lot of people because maybe my mother, and this is what I'm guessing because I don't have her experience, but I think what my mother was trying to find was a sense of community and a way to feel closer to God, and she didn't know where to start. And so an institution can sometimes provide a foundation for you and show you like like certain rituals or certain things that help you feel connected that maybe weren't visible or you didn't know about them before. So in my mother's instance, I think a lot of times because she was so religiously Catholic, she depended on the church to tell her like what was right and what was wrong. And she didn't do a whole lot of reading, I think, like of the Bible before then. But Southern Baptist, so when you think about religious structures, everybody has their own thing, right? So, like the Catholic Church is very formal, and there are a lot of layers to the Catholic Church. So, you have church leadership, you have God the Father, God the Son, the Holy Spirit. You have saints, and the saints are basically like intercessors, or for instance, like Mary is an intercessor. They connect you to God the Father and God the Son. There's a lot of levels to that, right? And different people within the Catholic Church have different beliefs on this. But my mother, in particular, felt that she was always accessing God through other people or other or through saints. So for instance, she felt like she wasn't as close to God because she had to go through the saints or she had to go through church leadership in order to feel a closeness to God. But when she went to, for instance, like a non-denominational church that had a very warm approach to like Jesus was readily accessible, or their approach or their viewpoint was that Jesus was readily accessible to her as a friend, as a leader himself, and that God the Father is also that way, then she felt like, wow, I can have an intimate relationship with God directly. And so that opened her eyes and that made her feel like she didn't need to lean on the ritual or anything else, but that she had a deep emotional connection to God through this type of relationship that the church was at.
Kudos for her for trying. I hear what you're saying about, the Catholic Church. Everybody I know, I only know one person who seems to be a happy practicing Catholic. All the rest of them are, like, destroyed with devastation and trying to figure out a way to heal and everything like that. And I mean, and I'm told, regularly about how the Catholic Church, like, doesn't really want the people to educate themselves or to read because the whole point of them is to stand in the place of God. And so I'm glad she made it out of that. And it seems like that she was able to still have a space for God, even though, the Catholic Church had damaged her and everything. And a lot of people leave the Catholic Church and they kind of get stuck in this whole, like, rut of just, like, being bitter towards all things religious. And I'm not judging them for that. But I hope people can learn to do what it sounds like your mother did and move past, "Yeah, they fucked me over in the Catholic Church, but, I still gotta grow with God somehow, so, try this other place or stay home and do it or whatever. We gotta do something." We can't just sit around and be bitter forever. Now, but everybody knows I'm also a proponent of outgrown churches. I hear what you say with the community, and people do go for community and everything like that. And it's all great. And I used to do that, go out to the lunches and the dinners with the people in the singles group and blah, 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 blah. But but I don't know, man. Like, at some point, I felt like I got too much into the community or too much into the rituals, or even though they weren't Catholic rituals and I was at a non-denominational church, it's still churches are just ritualistic by nature. It's all about a set program. You know, I think it's easy to get lost in the activities and forget that the primary purpose you're there is for spiritual growth. But at some point, since church is a school, you got to outgrow it. You cannot be under the. I don't think a person should be under the instruction, spiritual instruction of any denomination or pastor for like their whole life, because you have access to the same book that he does. It's not like there's some special shit that they know that you don't or can't look up. And so, what do you think about people becoming codependent on the church culture, community, and pastors before they realize it?
I think it's possible to do that with anything, actually. I think it's possible to crave structure and stability and find it in anything that feels safe. Um, Oftentimes, churches have been used as tools of oppression by people who wanted to seek out more power or control others. And I think it ends up being like the same thing over and over again, which is people are directing these churches, people are directing these rituals. So I don't necessarily blame it on the church or the belief system. I think it's just people in power leading things and trying to guide people to certain ways of life. I wouldn't necessarily say that I think that we outgrow churches, but rather that we outgrow maybe a particular person's teaching. Um, just like if you go to karate school or something, at some point, you're going to surpass the master. But I don't know if you surpass a belief system your whole life. Maybe you do. Depends on the person that you are. But I think that everyone's journey is different. And some of us may enjoy going to organizations or community kind of centers or circles because that's what we need. But for others, you might find ways to engage in multiple practices inside and outside of established organization.
I could see it going both ways. Just people be careful of where your loyalties really, really lie, and and pay attention to that. I think about how with everything that I had gone through in the church, looking back on it after I was ousted from there, once I had stepped away from it, I guess like any abusive situation, you really can't see it sometimes until you're out of it, and I look back and I go, "Gosh, I do love Jesus," but it seemed like I was into the building, into the church, into the pastor more than what I was consciously aware of at the time, and so that's why I bring this up in this way, like, so, fine, if you wanna go to church for the rest of your life, do that, but if you feel the most close there with God as opposed to when you're by yourself, I think that might be something to look at because, you the whole point of Jesus coming was for us to not need anybody to stand in between us and him. The whole point was to just be able to access him wherever you're at. And so, I don't know. Churches are cute, use them if you have to, but ain't nothing wrong with doing you too. That's all I'm saying.
I think establishing your own practice is critically important for sure. And I think not letting anybody just tell you what to do, but also questioning things and asking like, what do I think about this? Is this the right thing to do? And doing your own research is always very important.
But questioning things is not something that's taught in churches. How many scriptures get skipped over that deal with like bad pastoring and and things like that. They don't do that. I've never heard a preacher say, "Question me." They're all like, "Do what we say."
Well, I wouldn't paint so broad of stroke, I would say, but I do there that is very common. Absolutely, for sure. And again, it's the abuse of power. If you do not want to undergo the pressure of evolution or bettering yourself for the greater good of people, then that's your problem.
And that's all she has to say on that. And so I also took another note about how you said that your dad converted to Catholicism for your mother. Now, I know people do this and it happens. And I know there's a scripture that says something like one a spouse can convert the other or something like that. Although the primary wisdom is for us to be not unequally yoked with people who are unbelievers, but it sounds like your dad was a believer just in a different faith. So one of my main pet peeves about Catholicism, besides pretty much all of Catholicism, is this. Like if you're not gonna be Catholic, then you can't have access to this, or you're somehow like less than, or you have to we won't marry you to if the one of y'all is not, Catholic. You know, a person should convert to a religion if they feel that's what the spirit is leading them to do just for them and them alone. In my opinion, not in order to gain something physically, materially, or out of fear of what you might lose. Not judging your dad, clearly he loved your mother enough, but and we do all kinds of things. I mean, it's not like anyone died because of this, but I'm just saying, like, our spiritual walk is supposed to be like us, it's supposed to be so personal, you know, though we share it, when we have conversations or we hold hands and pray with our significant others or whatever, sure. But a whole conversion, that I mean, especially into Catholicism, that's taking on a heap load. So are we there because God called us there or because of other reasons? And it's easy to get lost in all of those rituals and think that you're doing it for the right reason, but anybody can kneel for all those times during the service, but is your heart there, you know?
I think my dad was a very slash is still a very chill person. And he thought, well, my own practice is my own practice. I'm still Christian. What does it matter what label I put on it? Because my dad wasn't like, didn't become a diehard Catholic, didn't subscribe, I think, to everything.
Mm.
He just loved my mom and he just wanted to get married to her. And she was like super Catholic. So, and she knew it. She knew he wasn't like diehard Catholic. He was just like super in love with her. So they went to church together. He supported her. We went to communion. We did all of it. We went to CCB. Like we did all of the things. And my dad supported, us learning about all of this, but he never like, he because he had been exposed to, like, I don't know, Southern Baptists and the Apostolic Church and stuff, really believed in more of like the mystical kind of stuff and his personal relationship with God. But I think eventually that's why my mom, having been seen my father's relationship with that, kind of wanted something else later because that's what worked for them. And again, I can't speak too much on their personal experiences because I was a child when that all happened. So I can't speak directly for them and say like, "Oh, they actually did find this," but I know from observing them and their relationship to spirituality now versus their relationship to spirituality then, what makes them happy and where they'd ended up and what they found out along the way.
Mm. Sounds like a sweet love story. Are they still together?
Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait. You need to I need you to introduce me to the parents, Eva. I think we've been together long enough now. It's been like 2 years. Something to bring me home to mom.
I well, there we go. That's like the next step of our relationship.
So, did anything in your spiritual journey, like, in terms of, like, and does anything negative ever happen? Did you have anything that was the cause of any sort of trauma or not so much?
I do actually have religious trauma, and I don't necessarily think that it's because of the church, but more along the lines of the relationship with my parents and their relationship with the church. So my parents are wonderful people and they brought us up in the best way that they knew was possible. But they were also very traditional. And as you know, as we've talked about before, I am very non traditional, maybe in a few ways. And in other ways, I am traditional, but I think that they knew I had gay tendencies from a early age. Um, and they knew that I leaned towards the more liberal and the more alternative stuff, which is not how they brought us up. They brought us up to be independent thinkers, but they also wanted us to live very traditionally, like get married, have kids, go to church. Like I was a deacon's daughter. We went to church like almost every day of the week. I sang in the music group. I led Sunday school. I took care of kids in the nursery. I volunteered with church events. Like I did everything. And then I went to the Bible churches. I went to Catholic church. When I got married, I'm divorced now, but when I got married, I converted to the church that my then husband attended because traditionally his family went there and I got baptized to attend that church as that particular denomination because I wanted to be a good little churchgoer and be part of a community and all that stuff. And eventually I turned away from it because I was doing a lot of kind of like introspection about like, well, how do I fit? Who am I? What do I want to do? Does this fit in with who I am as a person, or am I just lost and trying to find where I belong? And my experience with religion was unpleasant because I felt like I never fit in because I was bisexual and because I did express myself alternatively. Like I love tattoos and I love piercings and none of that was rebellious. Like I didn't want to be like, look at me, so different and I'm gonna slash their tires or something. Like I wasn't like, you know, I wasn't like that, but I was just who I was. And I felt like a lot of churches didn't embrace that. and that I was always people were expecting me to like settle down, take out my piercing, and get rid of my tattoos, wear a little J. Crew sweater,
Mm,
and have 2.5 kids. You know what I mean? Like I did get a lot of negative feedback for not fitting in as much and always being told that I was sinning. Like my mom was very she brought us up to be afraid of the end time. So like I grew up being very afraid of the end times, thinking that everybody would be raptured and that I would be left because I was so sinful mentally because I was gay. I thought that if I took communion when I was having sinful thoughts or hadn't repented properly of my sins, that I would be struck by God
oh, Lord.
and my body would wither or something. My parents were very evangelical. So at one point when my mom was like born again and very excited about it, we would pass out chick tracts. I don't know if you've ever seen those. They're like little cartoon books that tell you stuff like he went to hell and this is repent or die. You know, they're very bold little cartoons that people like evangelical Christians like leave at like malls and gasoline stations and stuff like that for people to pick up to convince them to be converted to Christianity. And
That's
so like they would give me a lot of booklets and we would go around the neighborhood because we grew up poor. So we lived in a really bad neighborhood. And we would like hand out these chick tracts to people and say stuff like, have you heard about God today? God can save you. And so, like, now as an adult, I really hate the evangelical hardcore approach of like, you're going to die, you know, and you're going to go to hell. And like, I hate that. I hate it. So, yes, the trauma that I have is based on aspects of religion that are negative towards people, that are punishment focused, and that shame people into being a forced community. Outside of that, I think religion and spirituality combined together can be very beautiful. And I'm currently on my journey to creating my own experience with who I am, my spirituality, and my religious tendencies.
them little chick track books sound like fucking horror stories. I would rather go to have gone to Hot Topic back in my day and picked up some Johnny the Homicidal Maniac or Emily the Strange shit off the shelf, and I probably would have been in better hands with those little goth fuckers right there. And so,
It was very scary. I'm not gonna lie. I hate seeing those books. If I ever run across them today, I probably would throw them in the trash. So I really like that. I don't think anybody should be forced into being pressured to believing something out of fear.
one of my key takeaways from when I was over in the Middle East for my 40th birthday celebration last year, now Dubai, Oman, Abu Dhabi, those places. I was not in like Saudi Arabia or nothing like that. But one of the key takeaways that I learned in those countries, in the Muslim cultures, there is no compulsion in religion. In the way American media spins it, they would have us think that those people are forceful, and if you don't go to the mosque 5 times a day and pray, then, hellfire, but they're not like that at all. They do not force people to do anything, and so, can't say that about American Christianity because it is very forceful and very abusive, and so that is unfortunate.
Well, I would disagree slightly with that because I do have friends who are Middle Eastern who grew up in the Middle East and grew up with families that were Muslim. My partner was raised Muslim and is Turkish, so he has a lot of Middle Eastern roots. And just like every religion, just like every aspect of spirituality for religious structures, there are negatives. It depends on who you are, who your family is, what organization you're going to. But he definitely felt pressure. And one of the things growing up in Turkey, he had, there were a lot of like, what's that called? Protests and stuff because Turkey was liberal previously. I can't remember what years it was liberal, but then they went through some riots because the religious institutions were becoming more conservative because people within the government who were conservative had taken over power and leadership. And so then they started forcing people to act a certain way and to dress a certain way. And there were a lot of more religious restrictions. So I also have some friends who grew up outside of Turkey, like other areas of the Middle East, and they also felt pressured to live and dress and act a certain way. So I would say within every culture, within every kind of community, there will be people who will pressure you to live a certain way and do certain things and shame you for not being that way. It's just a behavior of humankind. So while, yes, there are very beautiful aspects, and while, yes, American culture was heavily influenced by puritanical, restrictive viewpoints and colonialism, I still think that all organizations have their negative aspects.
True, true, because there's not gonna be anything perfect until we all get to heaven, my dear. But that's why I specified the exact countries that I was in, because I know that the Muslim countries, the Muslim religion is completely different depending on where you're at, which is the same thing over here. So I don't know what the hell they doing in Turkey, but I know in those countries that I was in, it was like super chill, especially in Dubai. Now I don't look at things like if a woman can't wear like regular clothes, because I'm not sure how much of that is because of the religion or how much of that is because of the culture, you know? And so, and it does vary. Like in Oman, there's no bars. So we don't drink out in public, because you can't find a drunk. But the more west you head over to Dubai gets a little bit more liberal. And by the time you get to Dubai and fuck it, bitch, come twirl, you got, kikiing in the street, completely different, but it's still the same religion. And so, like everybody in those countries I was in know if you don't care for the restrictive dress or if you want to be able to go out and drink in public, well, then you need to go over to Dubai. It's not going to work in Oman. And so I'm only speaking for those, but I question those people intensely, about like their religion, and we went to all the mosques and things like that and everything, and I really, really, really grilled them because I was so curious about why it was so organized, that why people seem to be so happy coming and going and things like that. You know, I don't know. I respect the fuck out of it. I did not get a sense of pressure from any of the people I talked to in the country that I was in. And the Middle East is not the same, from one end to the next. It varies. But it's no different than like in Christianity. You go to one supposedly look at how many different denominations you have within Christianity in and of itself. It's a completely different experience if you're Baptist versus Pentecostal versus AME versus Southern Baptist versus Missionary Baptist versus Catholic versus. So, but even over there, they said, "Look, we got our issues too." But I just didn't really feel like there was no, like, demonization of people that I came across. Like, if you don't go pray today, you're gonna go to hell. I didn't get that, that's what I was saying. Like, I don't get the demonization aspect of it. So,
That makes sense.
But now I'm ready to go to Turkey and see what the fuck they got going on there too. Then I can go
It's
there.
it's it's different in different cities, but there's a lot of religious pressure that it is currently there that didn't exist there in the late '80s, '70s.
It's a shame. It's just a shame. Well, maybe they can make it out of there and go to a more liberal, open-minded part of the Middle East. 'Cause it's not all strict like that. It just it just isn't. But I know people don't wanna leave their homes, but sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. In a church of all places, I was sad to hear that, they didn't accept you, they didn't like your little goth ways and everything like that. Because 'cause you're supposed to be able to go to church and get accepted there when you can't anywhere else. And so, unfortunately, that doesn't happen. I'm glad that you still have a positive head on your shoulder. And so, okay, let's talk about some of the scriptures that we all know and love to hate, talking about. So so Uvia and I have had, like, conversations about, like, Sodom and Gomorrah and about this story from the Bible where this one this woman gets, like, all raped and stuff, and so and then she, like, dies from it, and so our conundrum was, like, how can, people use, Sodom and Gomorrah, which doesn't actually involve any actual sex that had happened or anyone actually got hurt, to condemn any certain lifestyle, particularly queer people, and then skip over, the rape and death of this woman and don't use that to reference, you know any kind of sexual behavior in anything like that. Shall I read a part of this before you say what you have to say?
I mean, sure. I think if we read and then we ask about a particular
Alright.
part, then we can spin off of that.
Yeah, I couldn't tell if you were, like, teaming at the brim ready to, like, go, so I just thought I would ask first. So, I'm gonna read very, very quickly, and this is coming from the book of Judges. As Mama RuPaul would say, y'all, reading is fundamental, so just go make you some tea real quick for you Cabernet, whatever the fuck, roll you a blunt, so here we go. And so, I'm just starting at verse 18. So it says, we've come to Bethlehem. We've come from Bethlehem in Judah. The Levite answered, we went there on a visit. Now we're going to the place where the Lord is worshiped, and later we will return to our home in the hill country of Ephraim, but no one here will let us spend the night in their home. We brought food for our donkeys and bread and wine for ourselves, so we don't need anything except a place to sleep. This is a Levite priest traveling across country with his wife, and they got all they need, but they don't have a place to physically stay. The old man he's talking to said, "You're welcome to spend the night in my home and to be my guest, but don't stay out here, in these streets." And so the old man brought them into his house, fed the donkeys, and he and his guests washed their feet, traditional customs and stuff. They're having a good time. Then some worthless men of that town surrounded the house and started banging on the door and shouting, "A man came to your house tonight. Send him out so we can have sex with him." The old man went outside and said, "My friends, please don't commit such a horrible crime against a man who is a guest in my house. Let me send out my daughter instead. She's a virgin, and I'll even send out the man's wife. You can rape them and do whatever else you want, but please don't do such a horrible thing to this man." The ma Ugh, Lord help me, have mercy. The men refused to listen, so the Levite grabbed his wife and shoved her outside. The men raped her and abused her all night long. Finally, they let her go just before sunrise, and it was almost daybreak when she went back to the house where her husband was staying. She collapsed at the door and lay there until sunrise. About that time, her husband woke up and got ready to leave. He opened the door and went outside, and when he found his wife lying at the door with her hands on the doorstep. "Get up," he said. "It's time to leave," but his wife didn't move. He lifted her body onto his donkey and left. When he got home, he took a butcher knife and cut her body into 12 pieces. Then he told some messengers, "Take one piece to each tribe of Israel and ask everyone if anything like this has ever happened since Israel left Egypt. Tell them to think about it, talk it over, and tell us what should be done." Everyone who saw a piece of the body said, "This is horrible. Nothing like this has ever happened since the day Israel left Egypt." So in ancient Israel back in the day, it was customary for people to show courtesies to strangers passing through. This is what the angels sought in Sodom and Gomorrah when they went down there to destroy the city. That's all that Lot was doing. You take in strangers, you take care of folk. and such. You don't let somebody wander in and you see they have need and just close the door on them. And so this is why the person who's showing courtesy in this story didn't want the strangers out in the streets, 'cause he already knew how fucked up the people of this town were. Okay, so before you even get into, like, sex, this and that, and sexuality, they weren't doing the basic human dignity things that were expected of the time, and that's really the first thing. In my opinion, if God wanted to make Sodom and Gomorrah about sexuality, and I think it was Abraham he was talking to, he would have said, "I'm sending angels down there to destroy them because of sexuality, not because of unrighteousness," and I think it was Abraham said, if you could find 10 people there, will you not destroy it? And God said, if I could find 10 righteous people. He didn't say if I could find 10 straight people, I won't destroy it. He said what he said, and nothing else needed to be added to it. And in this scripture here, these people sound a little bisexual-ish or something to me. They wanted the men, they couldn't get that, but then they took the women. Another thing, and I think about is how women were not counted in the telling of these tales. And so they would say like 1,000 men were here, but they wouldn't count women and children on any given day or circumstance because it's just the way that culture was. Women just kind of like didn't count. As you can see by how they were treated here, it's just like pawns to appease men. And so who knows if there were women out in this crowd too, in Sodom or here. It's just the way things are recorded and spoken and stories passed along. This is something I think about. But what do you think about it, girl?
I think that the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is often used to be negative towards people who identify as LGBTQIA. I think, however, that what that story was trying to underline, in my point of view, would be that when humanity does not care for one another, they destroy each other. They destroy themselves in the process of destroying other innocent people. Because you can see that those terrible acts that were committed ended up costing them their lives. So, and I also think in cases of rape and assault, it doesn't matter what your, how you identify. When you rape or assault somebody, it's about power. It's not about love. It's not about sex. It's about power and what, how you're able to hurt someone. So for me, Sodom and Gomorrah is not about gay crime or anything like that, or about identity, bisexuality, being gay, nothing with that. It has to do with people putting themselves first in terms of negative behavior and things they want to do without regard for others' safety and health, and using it, using their power to hurt people. So I think that story shows that people who act negatively and hurt others who are not community minded will eventually pay for their crimes.
Well, damn, bitch. When when your church gonna open?
Yeah, I mean,
I'll go to yours. That makes
same.
that makes great fucking sense. I love that high level view that you just took right there. Oh, oh, I see you. Keep
Same.
talking. What the fuck can I say after that?
I mean, I've thought a lot about it because we, again, we were raised really strictly. I've read the Bible so many times in English and Spanish, study Bibles, all kinds of Bibles. We used to not be able to read other things during the day because we were raised so strictly. You had to read the Bible 3 or 4 times a day.
Oh,
We
jeez.
would have like 2 Bible studies a day with my mom. We weren't allowed to read anything else until we read the Bible. So and we would get punished for that if we didn't read the Bible before we read anything else. So, I know the Bible. Like, I read that thing back and forth and to and fro and top and bottom, everything. I've read it. So, I had a lot of time to consider what those stories meant to me back then and how they were taught to me versus who am I now and what do they mean to me now in the context of history and the the settings back then versus the settings now and the translations and how were these scriptures translated? What do these mean and who translated them? So like there's a lot of different factors and there's a lot people biblical scholars who are a lot more qualified to have these conversations, but in layman's terms of a person who's experienced various religions and who is LGBTQIA identifying, this is my take on it.
I don't think there's any greater person qualified to expand upon something than somebody who has lived it. So, I've been to seminary and everything like that, and what they were talking was bullshit. That's why I left. But because book work and study work is great and it's a total good aspect of it, but be it going to church or picking up a Bible, you know, you got to walk with God to really learn Him. Not everything is in the Bible, and not everything is going to be found at a church. You know, that's why I harp on individuality and unique experiences with the Lord away from everybody. Okay, and so you're able to say that the way you said it because you did it yourself. You know, they say flesh and blood did not reveal that to you. You know, you got alone with God somewhere and got personal revelation, and you made it personal, and you thought about it, and you opened up your mind to God, and you got revelation, and that's why you can say that with such clarity, conciseness, and confidence. You know, that is not something that you get from nobody. You know? See? Exactly. My whole point right here.
I have taken time to think about why do I still choose to believe, especially because I do have a lot of atheist friends and do have a lot of agnostic friends. And sometimes they ask me like, why are you religious? And I'm like, because I need this. I need this for me. I need this for myself. It helps me live and be happy. And they say, well, you're really more spiritual. You're not religious. And I'm like, I think it's possible to be both. I think that I can be religious and spiritual at the same time because those are different and they are not, I don't know what the word is. They are not always,
Mutually exclusive.
yes, correct. Not always mutually exclusive. In my case, I like to have both because it gives me the idea that something is bigger and more beautiful and unsullied as opposed to humanity gives me hope and makes me want to be a better person. Like the fact that there is something bigger than us, something more beautiful, something that leads us to be better people. Like that makes me happy. And I want to have that belief, even though I cannot prove it, even though I can't tell you, this is what I know for sure. I have scientific evidence of this. I can't give that to you, but I can tell you how it makes me feel and how it drives me to continue trying to evolve and be a better person and take care of myself and take care of others.
Well, you know what? If it's a if it's a spark and it's a good feeling that someone's looking for to start with, and we can start from there, you know, Nobody's saying you gotta turn into Moses and lead the children of Israel out of Egypt. Everybody's got their own journey to walk, but it's important to be conscious of it and take an active role, which is what Miss Peveto here has so beautifully demonstrated. She takes on the knowledge presented by the church and by different people, and she processes it, against her own belief system, you know, and is flexible, open to change, not so rigid, but also like I like how your friends tried to put you in that corner, but then you were like, you know what? No, respectfully so. I think not. So and so and I'm not saying it was a bad thing or whatever, but when we're in relationships with people, we kind of, that embracing this is gonna happen. And that's a part of what keeps things interesting. You know, we can push back like that and still respect each other, at the end of the day. I think it's a glorious.
Absolutely. I think different viewpoints are critically important to being a well-rounded person.
And so, yeah, I have atheist friends too, a lot of friends who are super undecided and everything like that. And I love the fact that they're comfortable being around me, knowing, how I feel about the Trinity and everything like that. And they don't think that I'm one of those asshole people who believes in God that's ever going to judge them. They know that they can come to me with anything and I don't view them, and I'm not like comparing them to the Bible or to church or whatever. I'm just seeing them as the valuable human that they are, even though they know that I believe in God. And I really, really, really appreciate that about the homies that I have. Okay, I don't think there's really much more we need to say. I love the way you I love the way you preached here at the at the end of this. And so y'all just I want people to take a more active thinking role about their spiritual self. At least we all agree that there's some sort of soul spirit within us, some sort of unseen part, because emotions cannot come forth from flesh. It has to come from something within you. And so tend to it in some type of way. Be that meditation, yoga. If you want to go to church, go on and go. Fine, fuck it. If you want if you wanna stay home and pray, whatever the case may be, just think about why it's important to you. Just think about feeding that unseen part, because if you don't, there's no way that you can be truly balanced, because you do have, a soul and a heart and a spirit living inside of you. How are you feeding it? What are you teaching it? How are you exercising it? How are you working with it? Just do something, for fuck's sake.
Do something for fuck's sake is a great slogan for life. Yes.
All right, girl, you could close us out with your last words, and then Imma go finish working on my full body waxing, which I do myself.
Amazing and painful. All right. Um,
And also greatly reduced, 'cause it was like $300 to go get it done. Now I could just get the wax for like 20 to $40 and just do it myself.
it's true.
It is
It's true.
It'll hurt either way, but some of us take a certain amount of pleasure in the pain, and you do know what I mean.
This is why we're friends. I I I hope that people aren't discouraged from exploring their spirituality. I hope people aren't discouraged from finding fulfillment in religion if that's something that they need and look for. I hope that they find a positive community of people who can support them in their journey and in learning more about what a role that plays in their life, and that they are not alone. Just because you're gay or you're different doesn't mean that you're excluded from the world of spirituality or religion. And there are places where you will be welcome. And just because somebody is being small minded doesn't mean you don't get to enjoy those things.
Well, amen and amen. Hallelujah, tabernacle and praise, y'all. This has been Miss TacoBelissima, also known as your cool aunt. You can find her on Instagram and on TikTok. all of this will go in the showy notes as it always does. And thank you so much, my dear sweetheart.
Absolutely. Thank you again for having me.
Mwah. Thank you all so much for taking time to listen to the Sex, Drugs, and Jesus podcast. It really means everything to me. Look, if you love the show, you can find more information and resources at sexdrugsandjesus.com or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Feel free to reach out to me directly at Devannon, sexdrugsandjesus.com, and on Twitter and Facebook as well. My name is Devannon, and it's been wonderful being your host today. And just remember that everything is going to be all right.